Whoa, hello everybody, it's me, Coach Joker Looter, signing in for another episode of the game design course. We are in the second part of the video of the course. So without further ado, let me actually put this in. There we go. Awesome. Now we are in full screen. So I had an idea of making this more didactic, especially for me. That I have actually here a word full file where I can take my notes in each chapter. So I'm actually like studying this subject. So without further ado, guys, we are here in the development teams. That's where we left off on the previous chapter, in chapter number 1, part number 1, because we're still in chapter 1. So let's get into that, shall we? So we are in development teams. In tiny independent teams, there can often be no space for designated product people, a term used to describe game directors or managers, producers, game designers, and live operation managers. In such situations, game design responsibilities are distributed between the artists and programmers. It's actually pretty good. Might be, I think, interesting. So, in independent teams, there can often be no space for designated product people or people, parentheses, have to see, directors or managers, producers, game designers, and live operation managers. I'm gonna put an etc. over here. Game design responsibilities are distributed between the artists and programmers. Okay. However, while a team with no designer may work well on a small indie scale, the prospect of running a game team of more than 5 people without a designated designer is a very risky one. With the freedom of distributed design, colloquially called design by committee, often comes a lack of ownership and accountability. That makes sense. While a team with no designer may work well on a small indie scale, the prospect of running a game team of more than 5 people without a designated designer is very risky. With freedom of distributed design often comes a lack of ownership. Making a good design decisions becomes increasingly difficult as a game is being pulled in different directions and lack a cohesive vision. In such teams, even the most pressing gameplay issues can go unaddressed. Everyone loves to chip in with their ideas, but nobody feels compelled to work on design problems, be it for the fear of associating themselves with the problem or the conflict of going against the rest of the team. In a commercial scenario, you're most likely going to be part of a small or mid-sized team. Anything with the 15 to 30 people would be considered a medium-sized team, and this number will always fluctuate depending on where you are in the development cycle, and includes a total of 2 to 4 design-oriented staff members. Smaller operation has a headcount of 5 to 12 people, and 1 or 2 other design-oriented people at most. It's also quite common, especially for a senior designer working on games with a relatively manageable scope, to be the only designated game designer on the project. Each company has its own approach to managing human resources, and while various artists and even programmers jump in and out of projects to help teams meet critical milestones, designers are often in it for the long run. That is, from pre production until a game is released, and most likely a long time after that. This is not only because of the importance of having a unified design direction, but also due to the sheer amount of time and effort required to get to know the game and make meaningful design decisions. While bigger teams have hugely varying structures with space for extreme specialization, medium and small teams usually share a similar setup across the industry. As a great example of the strategy of small teams, let's look at the creators of Brawl Stars and Clash of Clans, the Finnish game company Supercell, who by definition are an assembly of independent cells. Each cell is a small team consisting of a producer, game lead, a few artists and coders, at least one tester, a generalist game designer, and potentially a monetization live operation oriented person. People rotate it and out of their cells slowly as games are kicked off or killed, cancelled. Each team can also count on support from a stable of people who work for the whole company, taking care of data analytics, finance, social media, community management, operations, customer support, marketing, user acquisition, and so on. The goal of Supercell's structure is to create an environment that facilitates creativity and gives each team the power to make decisions on the game's design and direction. And what exactly is the role of a designer in such an environment? We'll touch upon that next. Put it right here. To responsibilities, abilities of a game designer. The tasks and responsibilities of a game designer vary dramatically and are affected by the team structure, project type, and development phase. To shed some light on what you might be required to do, let's look at a real-world example. Here's a list of tasks I undertook when working with a mid-sized team at a London studio, Space 8 Games, on a mobile game, Transformers: Earth Wars. The game could be classified as a part of the build and battle genre, similar to Clash of Clans, but with a multitude of unique characters, all with their own attacks and abilities. In the 2.5 year period, 1 year to initial test release, half a year to improve the game to a global launch, and a year of operating the game as a service, my tasks included the following. Running the game design document and most of the subsequent features specs. Smaller document explaining the game features and content required. This is very important. This is number one priority, I believe. Communicating the design vision, face-to-face and in writing, and overseeing the implementation of game mechanics, features, and content. Creating user flows and sketching user interface designs. Prototyping, designing, and implementing new gameplay systems and content, including characters with varied classes, stats, behavior, weapons, and special abilities. Game modes, achievements, buildings, and defenses. Level design and the creation of single-player campaigns. Planning, scripting, and tweaking tutorials, achievement, and cutscenes. Balancing gameplay with dozens of special abilities and over 100 unique characters. Writing and integrating in-game text and dialogue. Requesting and integrating new VFX. Over time, I also started doing more and more particle effects. That is visual effects such as muzzle, flashes, explosions, and projectiles, on my own by tweaking and combining existing ones. Planning a future content roadmap, new characters, game features, and story development. Managing an external writer and audio engineer, creating a list of tasks for them, feeding back on their work and integrating it. Addressing the community via weekly Twitch live streams, YouTube videos, Q&As, and so on. Now, this sure sounds like a lot to handle. Fortunately, I had another senior designer working with me during the first year of development. We also had the entire game economy handled by our monetization specialist. This included setting up and fine-tuning the income and spending of in-game currency, level ups, and upgrade curves, building timers and in-app purchases, and so on. We also had a live operations expert who joined later and took care of our weekly special events, in-app purchase promotions, and content rollout. All of these tasks can and often will also fall on the game designer. Don't worry, throughout this book we'll shed light on these confusing terms and technical jargon and build an understanding of how to approach your daily task as a game designer. First up, how our game projects run. Software development models. We'd like to help you better understand the production process and the path of a game project take. To achieve that, let's take a brief look at the two most common software development models, waterfall and agile. Waterfall. Waterfall, as we understand it today, is a sequential approach to production with no space for iteration. The product is supposed to go through 6 rigid phases in a specific order, always trickling down, such as a waterfall. Listing all software requirements, analyzing requirements, designing the whole product and its architecture, writing and implementing all of the systems and content, testing and debugging, operations, support, and maintenance of a completed product. Since this process allows for no iteration, its use in games development is highly limited. It can, however, be applied on a small scale, be it on a part of a game's content, for example, art assets production, or a single game feature with already proven mechanics and rock-solid specification. Applying waterfall on a whole product would most likely result in a broken game that ticks all the boxes but is not fun to play at all. Agile. Creating a highly polished and fine-tuned work of art is not easy, which is why games benefit greatly from extensive iteration. These iterative cycles are at the core of the Agile methodology of software development. The Agile Manifesto, which has a link, which popularized the movement, has led to the development of several frameworks. Scrum is one of the most popular in the game industry. Scrum is traditionally best suited for teams of 10 to 15 people. For larger teams, there are modified versions, such as large-scale Scrum and Scrum of Scrums. Scrum itself usually relies on sprint development cycles that last a few weeks, usually between 1 and 3, as well as short daily stand-up meetings where relevant progress is shared. Longer development cycles can be used, but anything spanning more than 4 weeks hampers the iterative process and it becomes very hard to plan. Flexibility is a core tenet of Scrum, and it has to be preserved by adhering to short sprint cycles. In Scrum, a product owner represents the interest of an end user and ensures that all development tasks are divided into a set of comprehensive tickets. Note: tickets are virtual reminders of the work you have to do. Most teams use online platforms such as Jira, which offer easy-to-use dashboards and manage everything from feature and content creation tasks to bugs and issues that come out of testing. Work done in each sprint cycle has to be properly tracked as tickets so that it can be planned and tested. A task to create a resource trading feature would probably take the shape of a user story, a task that's described from the point of view of the end user. Starting with as a player, I can easily trade resources with my guildmates, followed by a detailed set of functionalities and acceptance criteria, and possibly paired with a user interface, mockup, or a link to a relevant design document. These tasks are placed in the product backlog and wait for the end of the current development cycle. The backlog itself is a database of all tasks and bugs. It's usually handled by tracking software such as Jira and requires regular oversight from the production staff. On top of utilizing online dashboards, many teams use to create a physical sprint board, placed on an actual office wall or a large whiteboard. However, with the rise of hybrid and home working following the COVID-19 pandemic, these have largely fallen out of the fashion. The sprints themselves can consist of multiple phases. For example, in a game that has already been released, a 3-week sprint might have 2 weeks of development, after which all features are locked into place, and a week fully dedicated to bug fixing and testing, and a store submission of the improved version of the game. Each sprint formally ends with a retrospective and starts with a planning alignment meeting. During sprint planning, any upcoming tasks are pulled from the backlog, estimated by their respective disciplines, and slotted into the new sprint. Note: game designers working in agile teams will greatly benefit from their iterative nature and increased flexibility, but only if they stay diligent. Once the development cycle begins, it is unlikely you will be able to sneak in extra feature work. Any improvements and ideas you would like to put into the game will often have to be turned into concise and actionable tickets and brought to everyone's attention during sprint planning or backlog grooming. A regular analysis of all open tickets. Design documents and spreadsheets will rarely be seen by your teammates unless you include them in the tickets themselves. Or, better yet, review them with all relevant parties. Now that we have a basic understanding of the common models that drive game development, let's see how they are applied in action and dive into the production process itself. Production schedule and milestones. Due to their ever-changing nature, game projects are incredibly difficult to plan. By now, most gamers are very familiar with the frustration of having their most anticipated game delayed and pushed back multiple times. In such situations, no one suffers from more than the developer. Publishers rarely pay for extended development. Games vary in size, and teams vary in velocity. Still, the main production phase can span anywhere from several months from some of the smaller mobile games to 3 years, 5 years, or beyond for more ambitious titles. Game projects are divided into specific phases and milestones, and each milestone has a set of criteria that has to be fulfilled. If the project is being funded by a publisher, the developer will only be paid once the milestones are delivered, reviewed, and approved by the publisher. The production process allows for better structured development, better cost estimation, and a better chance of finishing a product on a specification and on time. Unfortunately, big design pivots, unforeseen technical issues, licensing problems, and financial pressures are commonplace in our industry. Experienced producers always push for a buffer of an additional 20 to 30% development time on each milestone, and quite often that still isn't enough. Note: these production processes are essential even if you work on your own or as part of a tiny independent operation. A set of deadlines even loosely defined short and mid-term goals to work toward will help you focus, stay motivated, and increase the chances of finishing a project. Greenlit gates and vertical slice. Game development is risky and expensive. To minimize the risk during the life cycle of a project, it will likely have to go through at least any greenlight gate, a point at which the fate of the game is decided. A failure to greenlight will force a team to go back and iterate on an idea or result in the game being cancelled altogether. Before real production starts, game designers work with producers to create and present the initial greenlight documentation to the key stakeholders of a company, hoping to convince them that the concept being proposed is a wise investment of time and money. In the highly saturated segments of the industry, market research and marketing teams play a huge role and thus are often involved from the very beginning. Once development starts, a version of the game itself is what's shown and assessed. It's a common practice to start the project with the aim of spending the first several months on creating a so-called vertical slice or first playable. Vertical slices are essentially demo versions of the main game that hope to showcase its potential, prove the artistic vision, and validate basic gameplay mechanics. Think of them as a vertical slice of a cake. They may cover a very small area of the final product but contains all major ingredients. It serves as a good indication of whether it's worth the commitment to make the whole cake/game, or at least to give the team a few more months to develop their product. It's not uncommon to use vertical slices to present a game to the press, create a teaser trailer, as well as to try and get external investors or publishers on board with funding the project. Nevertheless, at Diligent Studios, many games will get cancelled before they get that far. They get that far. A traditional milestone structure. While each studio and game team can have their own way of running a project, a variation of the traditional set of milestones and production phases is employed by most of them. Concept phase: an idea is born. A concept document, usually in the form of a 5 to 20 slide presentation, is created and pitched to key stakeholders. If the project is given the go-ahead, the initial pre-production team is assembled and tasked with expanding the concept. Pre-production. This is a crucial period where the most important design and technical decisions are likely to be made. Core gameplay mechanics are validated by prototyping. The game's scope, art direction, technical requirements, production schedule, and team size are all established. The market research and marketing teams learn about the competition, the size of the addressable market, and how to fit into it. At the end of the production, the GDD should be finalized by the design team and approved by key stakeholders. Production. The team begins to execute the accurate design, creating production, quality code, art assets, and content. At this stage, the game vision should be firmly set and the most important technical, artistic, and game design questions answered. It may be tempting to rush past pre-production so that you can make the actual game for real, but the further the game is into the production phase, the harder it becomes to make substantial changes in product design. This is when the poor and rushed design decisions are likely to come back and haunt you. The production phase itself can extend anywhere from a few months to several years and usually consist of several important milestones. 1. Pre-alpha. Depending on the length of the project, several interim production milestones are usually set, with the aforementioned vertical slice often being one of them. This gives the team a defined mid-term goal to work towards and are useful even if there's no publisher associated with them. Alpha. At the end of the alpha stage, the product should be feature complete, meaning the game is playable from start to finish, with all functionalities and content roughly in place. That said, the quality will be far from final, with many bugs left to be fixed and various improvements and changes to be made, often based on the results of playtesting. Beta. Beta represents a much more complete version of the game. In theory, all of the content is locked in place, and the only changes being made from then on are bug fixes, balancing changes, tweaks, and polishing. Some companies will conduct public beta tests that are either closed, invite only, or open to everyone. Gold candidate. Once all important issues have been addressed, a release candidate can be approved by the publisher to put the game on the path to distribution. The gold status itself goes back to the old practice of creating a gold master, a version of the game that would be signed off and used for mass duplication of the final product. Release. It is time to celebrate. Your game has beaten the odds. Making games is hard and expensive, and the vast majority never see the light of day. Post-release. Depending on the commercial performance and post-release support plan, the team will either drop the milestone structure and handle improvements and additions on a sprint by sprint basis, or create additional milestones around the creation of downloadable content or larger expansions. Validation funnel in game development. Let us delve into a slightly less traditional and more experimental approach to game production. While most game studios avoid talking publicly about unreleased and failed game projects, companies such as Supercell often talk about the huge number of games they have killed at the various stages of their life cycle. Some projects get cancelled as late as during a soft launch, that is, a test release in one of the smaller markets such as Canada, Australia, the Philippines, or the Netherlands. Isn't cancelling 9 out of 10 games hugely wasteful? And why would a nearly finished game ever get shelved? Companies that adopt this model often operate in the mobile market, where the cost of marketing and user acquisition can outweigh the entire development cost. As the mobile market is a hit-driven one and studio resources are limited, to release a poorly performing product would mean not working on something with a potentially much bigger upside. An opportunity lost, in other words. The process of gradually culling less promising projects is what the validation funnel is all about, and there's much to learn from it. No matter the type of game you work on and the markets you're operating, for one, games are never surefire hits. To allow for a high cancellation rate, especially in the early stages of development, is to enable your team to take more risk and be creative. It's also important to give the team the power to kill the product, rather than to have the decision flow from senior executives. The former is empowering and inspiring, and the latter antagonizes and demotivates. If the decision has been made well into production, a post-mortem presentation should follow. The aim of the post-mortem is to analyze the production process, explain the reasoning behind the key decisions, and share any learnings from the project across the entire company. The following is the validation funnel and game development process employed during my time at Space Ape Games. At the core of the process were small teams supported by shared company resources and outsourcing. While this funnel was focused on free-to-play mobile games, a similar approach could be taken with any digital product. Ideation. At Space Ape Games, several times a year, the company came together to form self-directed mini-teams that collaborate on something outside their day-to-day duties. This initiative often had a set objective and creative constraint. It may have been around T-shaping, branding, improving existing games, or coming up with new game ideas and prototypes. If new games were to focus, the lineup of concepts and prototypes was often voted on by the wider company. Ideas that were deemed viable could then be expanded upon and taken into production, or shelved awaiting a more suitable time. The ideation process was neither strict nor clean cut. We often had more promising ideas and spare people that could work on them. And there were several other venues in which a game idea could have been born. Nevertheless, the key differentiation here was that new games were not dictated by publishers, executives, or creative directors. They formed and gained traction organically from within a whole company. Pre-production. A small team is formed around the idea and expands on its design by definition, the moment-to-moment gameplay, progression systems, player fantasy, the theme of the game, and what will make it appealing and playable for years to come. The pre-production phase at Space Ape Games was often short and overlapped with the next step, market sizing. This validation phase usually includes market research, as well as testing an idea for a brand and potential user acquisition cost. To do the latter, we would often create a set of test advertising campaigns using a few potential art styles and brands for our game. The game would only pass if there was sufficient space for the product in the market and potential user acquisition costs were acceptable. It was possible to delay market sizing, and begin work on the internal prototype. But ultimately, all games needed to make sure they can run successful marketing campaigns at acceptable cost. Internal prototype. The game concept was now ready for execution, and a more polished and feature-rich prototype was created. The team would now extensively iterate on gameplay and gather feedback from internal and external playtesting. At the end of this phase, a company-wide test was held. If the team was satisfied with the feedback and believed in the product, and if there were no red lights on the horizon, the game idea would live on. Alpha. The team switched over to writing production quality code and continued to develop and playtest the game. The difference here is that alpha builds were often used to gather external feedback from real players. A test version of the game with a highly limited feature set and content was released in a small territory, often with a placeholder name and under a proxy publishing name. This can be a daunting endeavor, but the only way to test unknown quantities is to release the game into the wild and see how it fares, as everything is subject to extensive changes and most of the game would still be missing. These early versions of the game did not allow for any in-app purchases and were often not ready to provide reliable insight into important stats such as long-term user retention. They did, however, give you a baseline that could inform your future tests. It was quite common for game teams to release several of these public tests a few months apart to compare results and validate significant changes that have been made to the game. Beta. This was a natural expansion of the alpha stage, with production going full steam ahead. As always, company playthroughs, playtesting, and external validation helped to push the game in a more refined direction. At the beta stage, the metagame should have been validated. This meant the inclusion of long-term progression and features focused on improving player retention. The game was still likely to undertake major changes and would abstain from including any in-app purchases. Soft launch. At this stage, the game was released in a few territories. With the official title and branding, the game would remain in soft launch for several months as the team worked on additional features, balancing and polishing the product, and improving the key performance indicators. KPIs include user acquisition, cost, player retention, purchase conversion rate, the estimated lifetime monetary value of a retained user, game session length, and frequency. Release. As the game neared worldwide release, the company would finalize work on the game's marketing and user acquisition strategies. By then, the platform representatives, in this case Google and Apple, were already aware of the product and its upcoming release, increasing the chances of the game being featured and promoted on the digital storefront. Live operations. The worldwide release of a free-to-play game marked the end of the official development phase and the beginning of the live ops era. The game team would continue to work on designing and implementing new features and content, and the game's live operations managers would ensure a steady stream of engaging events. In the game as a service world, the global release was just the beginning. Thanks to market sizing, frequent playtesting, and multiple stages of internal and external validation, teams at Supercell and Space Up Games would take risks with their ideas, yet minimize the unknowns when launching a finished product. It may have been difficult for a game to make it to the end of the funnel, but once it did, it was much more likely to become critically and commercially successful, warranting ongoing support and investment for many years to come. As always, it's important to note that no process is set in stone. And I'm sure that Supercell and Space Ape Games are constantly evolving theirs, period. While every phase described here was important, the current approach is likely to shift and evolve along with industry practices, the company, and its culture. There's one more element to the game production puzzle that you are likely to encounter: publishing. Let's take a brief look at that. Okay, the role of game publishers. I think this is the last one. Yeah, it's very short. 34 minutes. Holy crap. It's possible that a game project you'll be working on will have a publisher other than your studio. The relationship between the publisher and the studio can either be internal or external. Whatever the relation to the developer, the publisher will not only release the product under its own name and market it, but also very likely cover all of the development cost. Deals and royalty structures vary greatly, but in most cases, publishers are the ones who keep the cash flowing between all involved parties and are the ones who are set to gain the most. Publishing can get very complex. Sometimes more than one studio will work on a single game, and other times an external owner of an intellectual property will be involved. When a publisher is engaged in the project, the detailed milestone structure mentioned previously will be of paramount importance, as it will carry financial outcomes for the developer. Publishers will have to approve the GDD and provide feedback on each and every milestone. This can, of course, limit the flexibility of the developer, but it will also help ensure the project stays on track and has a chance of being released. Sometimes publishers are also take care of initial ideation and see the game pitched to the developer. Summary. As you surely realize by now, game development is quite complex, and game design itself can be a very broad and elusive subject. We might have just scratched the surface, but so far we have looked at how games are produced, what kinds of teams make them, and what responsibilities a designer can assume within a development team. Some games might have no real ending, but every game project has a start. We will now put some of that industry knowledge into perspective and start looking at how to work on a game design idea and turn it into a presentable game concept. And remember, your job is not to design the perfect gameplay system and walk away. You are there to help realize the game's potential and turn it into the best possible experience for your players. Put your personal preferences and biases aside and focus on what's good for the project, even if it requires you to scrap ill-fitting ideas and throw away weeks or months of work in the process. And with that, guys, we are set off to chapter 2, which we're gonna cover in the next video. I'm just gonna put it over here so the browser can save it. And with that being said, thank you very much, guys. We covered a lot in this part of the video. This part 2 has a lot of content, has a lot of things you can read by yourself. Of course, that's why I put the book in front of you so you guys can read and not rely on me. I know that I'm not the best reader nor the best speaker, therefore you guys can use this video as you like. With that being said, thank you very much, guys. Please click like, subscribe, and see you guys next time. Bye bye.